It still hurts. The rancher did it anyway and shocked the whole town. The town of Willow Creek was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and life moved at a gentle, predictable pace. Nestled between rolling hills and wide-open pastures, it was a place where the sun rose over the fields and painted golden streaks across the wooden fences, and the evenings were filled with the soft sound of crickets and distant cattle. People here led simple lives, waking up early to tend to farms or small shops, greeting each other with warm smiles and nods. There was a rhythm to everything, and change came slowly, almost reluctantly, as if the town itself preferred to hold onto the comfort of familiarity. Among the townspeople, one figure stood out quietly. Mr. Thompson, a rancher in his mid-40s, owned a stretch of land on the outskirts of Willow Creek. He was a tall man with broad shoulders, weathered hands, and eyes that seemed to carry stories no one had asked him to tell. He was not the type to boast or seek attention. Instead, he preferred to rise before dawn, check on his livestock, and work through the day with a calm and steady determination. The neighbors often saw him in the fields, tending to the cows or repairing a fence, always with a look of quiet focus and care. Mr. Thompson's ranch was his pride and comfort. Every morning he walked the land as if greeting old friends. The cows and horses responded to his presence in a way that only animals can, coming close when he called, sensing the kindness in his tone. People in the town admired his dedication. He had a reputation for honesty and hard work, a man whose word could be trusted and whose hands could build, mend, and care for anything. Yet, beyond his quiet strength, there was an air of mystery about him. He didn't often attend town events, and while he would help neighbors when asked, he rarely shared personal stories or spoke about his past. Despite his quiet demeanor, Mr. Thompson was not unkind. Children who wandered near his ranch would often be greeted with a friendly nod or offered a fresh apple from his trees. He had a way of making people feel noticed, even without words. He didn't laugh loudly or boast about achievements, but when he did speak, his words carried weight. The older townspeople often remarked that he had a heart as big as his ranch, and those who had received his help never forgot it. Willow Creek itself had a charm that was hard to describe. The main street had a general store, a small diner where the townsfolk gathered for morning coffee, and a post office that seemed almost frozen in time. On weekends, families would stroll past the old church and the small park, waving at neighbors and stopping to chat about crops, the weather, or the latest news from nearby towns. Everyone knew when someone was sick, when a child had learned to ride a horse, or when a neighbor's cow had gone missing. Life was intertwined, and the sense of community was strong. But beneath the calm surface, life in Willow Creek had its struggles. Not everyone had the easy life that came from steady work or healthy crops. Some families were still trying to recover from bad seasons or medical expenses that seemed too heavy for small-town pockets. While the town appeared peaceful, there were whispers of old grudges, disputes over property, and the silent tension of people holding on to their pride. People didn't often show anger openly, but the history of the town ran deep, and sometimes it bubbled just beneath polite conversation. For Mr. Thompson, these undercurrents didn't change his routine. He remained a steady presence, tending to his land, feeding his animals, and quietly helping neighbors. There was a comfort in the predictability of his days, even if inside he carried memories that no one else knew. He had experienced loss in his past, moments that had shaped him into the man he was. Though he rarely spoke of it, these memories influenced his actions, making him more patient, careful, and compassionate than most. On a crisp autumn morning, the kind that painted the hills in shades of gold and red, Mr. Thompson was up before sunrise. The air was cool, and the smell of dew on the grass filled the fields. He walked the fence line, inspecting for weak spots, then moved to check on the horses who were already stirring. He murmured softly to them, his voice low but soothing, and they responded with gentle nuzzles and wickers. It was a simple moment, but one that spoke volumes about his character, his connection to his animals, his care for his land, and the quiet dignity with which he lived his life. As the day went on, the town slowly woke. The diner opened, the smell of fresh bread and coffee spilling into the streets. Farmers prepared for the day, children hurried to school with backpacks bouncing, and neighbors exchanged greetings with nods or waves. Everything seemed ordinary, and yet there was a feeling of anticipation, though no one could name it. Life had a way of moving predictably until a single spark disrupted the calm, and Willow Creek was about to experience a moment that would be remembered for years to come. Even so, Mr. Thompson carried on with his routine, unaware of the challenges and surprises that the day might bring. His focus was on his ranch, on the animals that depended on him, and on the work that gave him purpose. The townspeople admired him from afar, some wondering what went on behind the calm exterior, and others simply trusting that his quiet strength would see the town through whatever came their way. The beauty of Willow Creek was in its simplicity, but it was also in its people, their kindness, their resilience, and the connections they shared. And at the center of it all, a man like Mr. Thompson stood as a quiet anchor, a reminder that heroism doesn't always come in loud gestures or dramatic moments. Sometimes, it lives in the everyday acts of care, patience, and courage that define a person's character long before anyone calls them a hero. And so, the town of Willow Creek continued its morning routine, unaware that the calm, predictable life they cherished was about to be tested in ways no one could have imagined. But for Mr. Thompson, the rancher with a quiet heart and strong hands, the next chapter would reveal not just the challenges ahead, but also the true measure of his courage, and the way one person's actions could shock an entire community. The morning in Willow Creek had begun like any other, with the soft sunlight spilling over the fields and the gentle clatter of daily routines. Children ran to school, farmers prepared their equipment, and the town's small diner was filled with the aroma of coffee and freshly baked bread. Yet beneath this calm, there was an uneasy feeling that seemed to float in the air, though no one could quite name it. It began at the edge of town, near the old communal barn that had stood for generations. The barn was more than just a building. It was a gathering place, a storage space for hay, and home to animals during storms. Its walls, weathered and aged, held memories of countless town events, from harvest festivals to summer fairs. On this particular morning, a faint smell of smoke began to drift through the air. At first, it was subtle, almost easy to ignore, but within minutes it grew stronger. Mr. Thompson, tending to his animals on his ranch, noticed it first. The sharp tang of burning wood carried over the fields, and instinct pushed him to look toward the barn. From a distance, a thin plume of smoke was rising, curling into the sky like a warning. His heart tightened. Fires were dangerous, especially in a town built mostly of wood and dry grass. Without hesitation, he mounted his old horse, feeling the familiar grip of the reins beneath his hands, and rode toward the smoke. By the time he reached the barn, the scene had changed. Flames were licking the wooden beams, growing higher with each passing second. The fire had spread quickly, and the heat was intense even from a distance. Panic had begun to ripple through the town. Farmers dropped tools, children clutched their parents' hands, and neighbors rushed out of their homes, pointing and shouting warnings. The fire was alive, threatening not only property but also the animals and equipment inside. Inside the barn, chaos had erupted. Cows bellowed in fear, horses stampeded, and the smaller animals darted in every direction, desperate to escape. Smoke filled the air, making it difficult to see or breathe. The smell of burning hay and wood was suffocating. Most townspeople stopped at the edge, unsure what to do, paralyzed by fear. The fire was too strong and they were afraid for their own safety, but Mr. Thompson did not hesitate. Without a word, he dismounted, pulled a thick leather coat over his shoulders, and ran toward the barn. His boots sank into the soft earth as he moved, his mind focused on one thing: saving the animals. He ignored the fear that tightened in his chest, the heat that seared his skin, and the smoke that clawed at his lungs. Every step brought him closer, and every thought reminded him of the responsibility he carried, not just for his own animals, but for the lives and livelihoods of the townspeople. He entered the barn through a side door that had been left slightly open. Inside, the smoke was choking. Visibility was almost zero, and the crackling of flames echoed through the space like thunder. Animals were trapped, some frozen with fear, others struggling to escape. Mr. Thompson called their names softly, reaching out to guide them toward safety. A frightened horse bolted, nearly knocking him to the ground, but he held on, keeping calm even as adrenaline surged through his veins. Neighbors had gathered outside, watching in shock. Some had grabbed buckets of water, trying to help, but it was clear that their efforts alone would not be enough. The fire was spreading too fast, consuming the roof and sending sparks flying into the dry grass outside. Many people whispered prayers, hoping that no one would get hurt, while others shouted warnings to keep their distance. As Mr. Thompson moved deeper into the barn, he realized that several animals were trapped under fallen beams. Without thinking twice, he lifted heavy wood, feeling the weight strain his arms, and freed the frightened cows. One by one, he guided them toward the exit, his hands steady despite the burns and cuts he was beginning to feel. A calf squealed, terrified, and he crouched down, lifting it into his arms and running toward the open doorway. The townspeople gasped as they saw his bravery. No one had expected such fearless action, especially from someone so quiet and reserved. For a moment, fear and admiration clashed in their hearts. Mr. Thompson's actions were dangerous, almost reckless, but they were also heroic. He had become the eye of the storm, moving with purpose amid chaos, saving lives when everyone else froze in fear. Yet even as he worked tirelessly, danger loomed. A part of the roof above him cracked, sending sparks and smoke into the air. His coat caught fire in one spot, and he yanked it away, ignoring the burn on his shoulder. He knew there was no time for hesitation. Hesitation could mean death for the animals, or for him. With determination, he continued, moving through the smoke, calling for the smaller animals hidden in corners, checking every nook and crevice. A few neighbors finally gathered courage and followed him inside, carrying buckets of water and blankets to shield the animals from falling debris. It took hours, though it felt like minutes in the chaos. Slowly, with sweat and soot covering his face, Mr. Thompson emerged from the barn, leading the last frightened animals into the safety of the open field. The crowd outside erupted in applause and cheers, some crying tears of relief, others shaking their heads in disbelief. The fire was still blazing, but the lives inside the barn had been saved. People rushed forward, patting his back, thanking him, calling him a hero. Yet Mr. Thompson stood quietly, breathing heavily, looking back at the flames with a mix of pride and sadness. He had saved the animals, yes, but the barn, the heart of the community for generations, was badly damaged. He knew rebuilding it would be a monumental task, and he also knew that the town would now be filled with questions. Why had the fire started, and could it have been prevented? As the excitement settled, whispers began to circulate. Some people wondered why Mr. Thompson had acted alone, risking his life instead of waiting for the town's fire brigade. Others speculated about whether there was more to his bravery than met the eye. They had always respected him, but few had seen this side of him, the man willing to put everything on the line without hesitation. A mixture of awe and curiosity filled the air, mingling with the lingering smoke. Later that day, after the fire was finally under control, the town gathered near the barn. Flames still flickered in isolated spots, and the smell of smoke hung heavy, but the danger had passed. Mr. Thompson walked among the neighbors, checking that everyone was safe, sharing a quiet word with those in shock, and offering reassurance to frightened children. His calm presence brought comfort, and even those who had doubted his courage felt relief in his steady eyes. Yet as he returned to his ranch that evening, the reality of the day weighed on him. The fire had been intense, far more than he had anticipated, and he had felt fear more acutely than anyone knew. His hands were scraped, his coat scorched, and his muscles ached from hours of lifting, running, and guiding terrified animals. But beyond the physical exhaustion was a deeper, quieter fatigue, the awareness that life in Willow Creek could change in an instant, and that even acts of bravery could carry consequences beyond immediate gratitude. That night, as the town settled under a blanket of stars, people talked quietly in homes and on porches. They shared stories of Mr. Thompson's courage, and many began to see him in a new light. He was no longer just the quiet rancher on the outskirts. He was someone willing to face danger when no one else would, someone whose actions would be remembered for years. But even as admiration grew, a subtle tension lingered. People wondered about the fire, about why it had started, and whether there was more to the story than simply a tragic accident. For Mr. Thompson, the events of that day were a reminder of the fragility of life and the responsibilities he carried, not only for his own family and animals, but for the entire community. He knew that the town would remember his actions, talk about them, and perhaps even judge them. But deep down, he understood that courage was not about praise or recognition. It was about doing what was right, even when it hurt, even when it scared you, and even when no one else understood why you acted as you did. The morning had begun like any other, but the events at the barn had changed Willow Creek forever. People would talk about the fire, about the bravery they had witnessed, and about the quiet rancher who had risked everything. And for Mr. Thompson, the day would be remembered not for the cheers or the admiration, but for the knowledge that in the face of danger, he had acted with a heart full of courage, guided by a sense of duty and care that no fire could ever destroy. The town of Willow Creek had begun to recover from the fire, but life was not quite the same. Though the flames were out and the animals were safe, a sense of unease lingered in the air. People walked more cautiously near the damaged barn, glancing at its charred beams and blackened walls as if they were reading a story written in smoke. Everyone was still talking about Mr. Thompson's bravery, yet beneath the admiration, whispers began to grow, questions about why the fire had started, and why Mr. Thompson had acted so fearlessly, putting himself at risk. Mr. Thompson, however, did not concern himself with gossip. He spent his days checking on his ranch, tending to the animals and repairing fences. The physical work offered him comfort, a way to focus his mind and quiet the thoughts that threatened to weigh him down. But inside, his heart was heavy. The events of the fire had stirred memories he had long tried to forget, memories of loss, regret, and choices that had haunted him for years. He remembered his family, long gone now, and the tragedy that had shaped the man he had become. Years ago, he had lived in a larger city, with a wife who laughed easily and a young son who had filled their home with joy. But a sudden illness had taken them both, leaving him alone in a world that felt empty and cruel. The grief had been unbearable, and for a long time he had tried to run from it, moving from place to place, searching for a quiet corner of the world where he could live without constant reminders of what he had lost. Willow Creek had offered that peace. The ranch, the animals, and the simple rhythm of life had become his refuge, a place where he could heal in silence. Yet the fire had brought it all back. As he watched the flames consume the barn, he had felt a strange connection to the panic and fear surrounding him. The trapped animals reminded him of his own helplessness during the hardest days of his life, and in that moment, he had acted not just out of courage, but out of a deep, unspoken need to protect life wherever he could. Saving the animals was more than duty. It was a way to confront his own pain, to prove to himself that even in the face of loss, he could act with strength and compassion. The townspeople, however, did not know this. To them, Mr. Thompson was simply the quiet rancher who had risked everything in a moment of crisis. They celebrated his heroism, but also began to ask questions that cut closer to the truth. Some wondered why he had ignored safety warnings, why he had acted alone, and whether his connection to the fire went deeper than anyone realized. People speculated about his past, about who he was, and why he had chosen to live on the outskirts of town, so distant and private. It was during one of these quiet afternoons that a few townspeople decided to approach him. Mrs. Reynolds, the owner of the local bakery, and Mr. Carter, a farmer who had once worked alongside him, walked up to the ranch with cautious steps. They wanted to express gratitude, of course, but also curiosity about the man behind the heroics. "Mr. Thompson," Mrs. Reynolds began, her voice gentle, "we just wanted to thank you again for what you did. You saved so many lives today, the town owes you more than we can say." Mr. Thompson nodded quietly, brushing dust from his coat. "It was the right thing to do," he said simply. "No one should get hurt if it can be helped." "But why risk yourself like that?" Mr. Carter asked, his brow furrowed. "We've all seen danger before, but you ran straight into the fire." Mr. Thompson paused, looking out toward the charred barn in the distance. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "doing what's right means facing the things that scare you the most. I couldn't stand by while lives were at risk." They nodded, but there was more in their hearts than admiration. They could see it in his eyes, something deeper, something that hinted at pain and experience far beyond what they knew. They had never seen him talk about his past, and now, in the aftermath of the fire, the quiet strength that had always defined him seemed to carry secrets. Over the next few days, Mr. Thompson's history began to emerge in small ways. Old friends from neighboring towns came by, asking about his life before Willow Creek. They spoke of his family, of hardships he had endured, and of moments that had shaped him into a man both strong and quietly sorrowful. The stories painted a picture of someone who had faced tremendous loss, but refused to let it define him. His bravery at the barn was no surprise to those who knew the full story. It was simply another example of the man he had always been. For the townspeople, this revelation was both comforting and unsettling. They had admired his courage, but now they were confronted with the weight of his past. They realized that heroism was not simply about dramatic actions, but about the quiet, ongoing struggle to live with integrity and compassion, even when the world had dealt unfair blows. Mr. Thompson had acted out of love and responsibility, not only for the animals and his neighbors, but also as a way to make sense of his own experiences, to prove that loss did not mean surrender. Despite the admiration and new understanding, tension lingered. Some townspeople could not shake the question of whether the fire had been preventable. They whispered about warnings that had gone unheeded, about the importance of preparation and caution. Even though Mr. Thompson had saved lives, the fact that danger had existed in the first place sparked debate. People struggled to reconcile their respect for him with their concern for what might have happened, and the town became quietly divided, some placing him on a pedestal, others questioning his judgment. Mr. Thompson, however, did not engage in the debates. He focused on what he could control, his animals, his land, and his own heart. He worked tirelessly to repair fences, tend to the fields, and care for the animals that had survived the fire. His hands were calloused and sore, but his resolve was unwavering. Every action he took was quiet and deliberate, reflecting a man who had learned through hardship that life required patience, endurance, and a steady heart. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, casting long shadows across the town, Mr. Thompson sat on the porch of his small house, watching the smoke drift from the last embers of the barn fire. He thought about the lives saved, about the gratitude of neighbors, and about the memories the day had stirred in him. He also thought about the fragile line between courage and recklessness, between intention and consequence. That line had been tested, and while he had emerged physically unharmed, the emotional impact was something he would carry with him for a long time. He reflected on the deeper lessons of the fire. Courage was not just about facing danger, it was about understanding the risks, accepting responsibility, and acting with a sense of purpose. Love, too, had many forms. His love for his animals, his neighbors, and even the memory of his lost family had guided him. It had been that love that had driven him into the flames, and it was that same love that would continue to shape his days in Willow Creek. At the same time, he knew the town was watching, judging, and trying to understand. People would talk about him, about his past, and about the fire for months, perhaps even years. But he understood that heroism, like life itself, was never simple. It carried with it shadows and light, admiration and doubt, praise and critique. The important thing was not the opinions of others, but the choices he made and the integrity with which he lived. As the days passed, Mr. Thompson's story began to intertwine more deeply with the town's. Children would wave to him as he walked his animals, neighbors would nod in respect, and friends would stop by to share a quiet conversation. The fire had changed Willow Creek, revealing both the fragility and the strength of the community. It had revealed the heroism of one man, but also the deeper truths of human experience, the pain, the courage, and the quiet battles fought within each heart. And through it all, Mr. Thompson remained the steady figure he had always been, shaped by grief, guided by compassion, and strengthened by the knowledge that life, even after loss and fear, could still hold moments of hope, connection, and meaning. The barn fire was no longer just an event. It had become a turning point, a lens through which the town and the man himself could see the depth of courage, the complexity of human emotion, and the enduring power of love and responsibility. In the quiet evenings, as he walked his fields, tended his animals, and watched the sky change colors, Mr. Thompson felt the weight of the past and the promise of the future. The fire had stirred old wounds, yes, but it had also reminded him, and the town, of what truly mattered. The strength to act with courage, the patience to heal, and the willingness to face life's challenges with a heart open to both pain and possibility. Willow Creek would never be quite the same, and neither would he. But in the aftermath of the fire, in the smoke and the ashes, there was also clarity, a reminder that life's challenges, no matter how sudden or frightening, could reveal the true character of a person, and that courage and compassion often came hand in hand, quietly shaping the world in ways both seen and unseen. The town of Willow Creek was slowly returning to routine after the fire, but a new kind of tension had taken hold. The barn, once the center of community life, remained a blackened ruin, its charred walls a constant reminder of the danger that had almost consumed it. Neighbors whispered quietly as they passed, some praising Mr. Thompson, some questioning him, and some still unsure of what to believe. The fire had brought out both admiration and doubt, and the town was beginning to show its divided feelings. Mr. Thompson continued his daily work as if nothing had changed. He repaired fences, fed his animals, and walked the fields with steady determination. Yet he could sense the undercurrent of conversation about him. People looked at him differently now, their eyes filled with curiosity and in some cases unease. For a man who had lived a quiet life on the outskirts of town, this attention was new and uncomfortable. But he remained calm, focusing only on what he could control. Still, the whispers persisted. Some townspeople questioned why he had acted alone. Why hadn't he waited for help? Why hadn't he taken more precautions to prevent the fire in the first place? Others wondered if his actions were motivated purely by courage, or if there was something personal driving him, something tied to his past, something only he could understand. These questions, though unspoken aloud in public, spread like wildfire in private conversations. Mrs. Reynolds, the bakery owner, found herself caught in the middle of these feelings. She had always admired Mr. Thompson's quiet kindness, and she had been among the first to thank him after the fire. But even she could not ignore the unease in the air. One afternoon, she visited him at the ranch, carrying a basket of fresh bread and pies, hoping to offer comfort and reassurance. "Mr. Thompson," she began gently, "the town has been talking. Everyone agrees you were brave, but some people are confused. They can't understand why you didn't wait for help or take more precautions." Mr. Thompson looked at her, his eyes calm but tired. "Sometimes, Mrs. Reynolds," he said slowly, "there isn't time to wait. When life is in danger, hesitation can cost everything. I did what I thought was right in that moment." "But some people feel betrayed," she admitted, her voice soft. "They don't mean to, but they're trying to understand. They respect you, but they're also scared of what could have happened." Mr. Thompson nodded. He understood their fear. He knew that people's judgments often came from concern, and that sometimes admiration and worry could exist side by side. "I accept that," he said quietly. "I can't control what people think, only what I do. My duty is to act with care, and I did that." Meanwhile, the town's council decided to hold a meeting to discuss the aftermath of the fire. The purpose was simple: to assess the damage, plan for repairs, and discuss safety measures to prevent future incidents. But the meeting quickly became a forum for deeper questions. Residents expressed concern about Mr. Thompson's actions, while others praised his courage. The room was filled with tension as opinions clashed. Mr. Carter, the farmer who had spoken to Mr. Thompson before, voiced his worry aloud. "We all know he saved the animals, but what if he hadn't? What if something worse had happened? We need rules, precautions, and clear plans. One man can't always risk everything alone." Several others nodded in agreement, though their voices carried admiration for Mr. Thompson as well. "He's brave, yes," one said, "but bravery isn't always enough. Safety comes first." The discussion continued, growing more heated as the townspeople debated what had happened. Some argued that Mr. Thompson's actions were heroic and a model for courage. Others insisted that even the bravest actions could carry serious consequences, and that no one person should put themselves at such risk again. The room was divided, with tension thick enough to touch. As the meeting concluded, Mr. Thompson returned to his ranch. He had not spoken much during the debate, preferring to listen. But inside, he felt the weight of the town's judgment. He had acted out of duty, compassion, and love for the animals, yet even acts of courage could be misunderstood. He realized that heroism was not always met with unanimous praise, and that life's choices often carried shadows along with light. That evening, he walked through his fields, letting the cool air wash over him. The horses nickered softly and the cows grazed quietly, sensing his presence. He allowed himself a moment to reflect. The fire had revealed more than bravery. It had shown the depth of human emotion, the fear, admiration, doubt, and judgment that all existed within a community. He had faced danger, yes, but he had also confronted the reality that people's hearts were complex, and their feelings toward him would be equally layered. Despite the uncertainty, Mr. Thompson remained committed to his principles. He continued repairing the damaged barn, working tirelessly to restore what had been lost. Every nail he hammered and every beam he lifted carried a deeper meaning. He was rebuilding not just the barn, but trust, understanding, and the balance between courage and responsibility. The physical labor gave him focus, a way to channel both his grief and his hope. The town, however, did not move as quickly. Rumors continued to circulate. Some people speculated about Mr. Thompson's past, wondering if old experiences had shaped his decision to act so boldly. Others debated whether the fire had been an accident or a result of negligence, and whether responsibility should be assigned differently. Even as they spoke, they could not ignore the undeniable fact that his actions had saved lives. The town's admiration was mingled with unease, creating a complicated tapestry of emotions. Children, meanwhile, continued to look up to Mr. Thompson. They saw him as a figure of strength and courage, someone who had faced fire and danger without flinching. They ran to him when he walked near the fields, asking questions about the animals, the barn, and the fire. He answered gently, teaching them about responsibility, care, and courage. In these moments, the town's doubts seemed to fade, replaced by the simple truth that bravery and compassion could inspire the next generation. One day, a journalist from a nearby city arrived, having heard about the fire and the rancher who had saved the animals. They wanted to write a story about Mr. Thompson, to capture his heroism and share it with the world. The townspeople were divided on whether this was a good idea. Some felt proud that their quiet town was being recognized, while others worried that publicity would stir even more judgment and gossip. Mr. Thompson agreed to the interview, but on his own terms. He spoke softly, explaining his actions without exaggeration or drama. "I did what anyone should do when lives are at stake," he said. "It wasn't about being a hero. It was about responsibility, care, and doing what is right. That's all anyone can do." The journalist listened, captivated by his humility and sincerity. They realized that the story was not just about bravery, but about the human heart, the struggles, choices, and quiet sacrifices that defined a person's life. The article would later be published, praising Mr. Thompson's courage while also highlighting the complexity of heroism and the challenges of living with past pain. Despite the attention, the town's divisions persisted. Some neighbors expressed concern about future risks, others debated whether praise was deserved, and a few quietly worried about the man himself. They did not know the full extent of his past, the losses he had endured, or the quiet battles he fought every day. And yet, even amid doubt, his presence remained a stabilizing force in Willow Creek, a reminder that courage often comes with sacrifice, and that human hearts are rarely simple. Through it all, Mr. Thompson remained steady. He tended his land, cared for his animals, and continued rebuilding the barn. He knew that the fire had left marks on both the town and himself, and that healing would take time. He also understood that people's reactions, whether admiration or doubt, were a reflection of their own fears, hopes, and experiences. His responsibility was not to change their minds, but to act with integrity and compassion every day in ways both big and small. As weeks passed, the town began to adapt. The barn, though still scarred, was slowly being restored. Conversations about the fire evolved from blame and doubt to lessons about safety, preparedness, and community support. The memory of Mr. Thompson's actions remained vivid, a story that would be told for years to come. People continued to debate, to admire, and to question, but they also began to see the layers of courage, love, and responsibility that had guided the rancher through that dangerous day. And through it all, Mr. Thompson remained unchanged in the ways that mattered. He was still quiet, still dedicated, still carrying the weight of past loss alongside his determination to protect life and nurture his land. He had faced not only the fire, but also the judgment, curiosity, and divided opinions of a small town. In doing so, he had shown that true courage is not measured only by the dramatic moments of heroism, but by the steady, unwavering commitment to act with care and compassion, no matter the cost or recognition. Time moved slowly in Willow Creek, but life always found a way to continue. The charred remains of the barn were gradually replaced with fresh wood, new beams, and a roof that promised safety once more. Though the scars of the fire remained, they were no longer a symbol of tragedy, but of resilience. The townspeople, too, were learning to move forward, slowly letting go of fear and judgment, and embracing the lessons the fire had taught them. Mr. Thompson, as always, continued his work. His hands were still rough from daily labor, his face often lined with dust and sweat, but his heart felt lighter. The physical act of rebuilding the barn, caring for the animals, and maintaining his land became a form of therapy. Each nail he hammered, each beam he lifted, and each fence he repaired was a step toward healing for himself, for the animals, and for the town. The people of Willow Creek, meanwhile, had begun to see Mr. Thompson in a new light. Children ran to him with questions, curiosity, and admiration, eager to learn about the horses and cows, the daily life of a rancher, and the story of the fire. Parents explained to their children the lessons they had learned. Bravery is not only in dramatic moments, but in everyday actions guided by kindness and responsibility. Slowly, the whispers of doubt faded, replaced by stories of courage and quiet strength that would be remembered for generations. Yet the experience had left a lasting impression on everyone. The fire had reminded the town that life was fragile, and that danger could appear when least expected. It had also shown that heroism came in many forms, not only in grand gestures but in steady, consistent care and in the willingness to face fear for the sake of others. Mr. Thompson had become a symbol of this kind of courage, a living example that actions taken from love and duty often left a mark deeper than words could describe. For Mr. Thompson, the fire and its aftermath were more than events. They were reflections of his own journey. He had spent years carrying the weight of loss, grief, and solitude. He had built his life around quiet routines and careful work, seeking peace and healing on the open land. The fire reminded him that life could not always be controlled, and that courage was not about avoiding danger, but about responding to it with heart and purpose. In saving the animals, he had also confronted his own fears, and in the eyes of the townspeople, he had reminded them of the strength that exists within every person, even in silence. As the barn neared completion, the town decided to hold a small celebration. Not a grand event, but a simple gathering to honor what had been saved, to acknowledge the hard work of Mr. Thompson and the community, and to look forward to brighter days. People brought food, shared stories, and offered words of appreciation. Children played nearby, laughing freely as they learned from the rancher who had become both a guide and a hero. During the celebration, Mrs. Reynolds approached Mr. Thompson with a warm smile. "You've done more than save the animals," she said softly. "You've reminded all of us what it means to be brave, to care, and to act when it matters most. We're lucky to have you here, Mr." Thompson looked out over the crowd, at the smiling faces of his neighbors, the children who had once watched in awe as he ran into the fire, and the barn that now stood tall and sturdy. He felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense that the pain of the past and the challenges of the present had finally begun to blend with hope for the future. "I just did what anyone should do," he said humbly. "Life is too short to stand by when help is needed. That's all I know." Even as admiration filled the air, the townspeople also recognized that Mr. Thompson's courage had not been without cost. His hands were calloused, his body tired, and the emotional weight of the fire lingered in his eyes. Yet he bore it with quiet dignity, showing that true heroism is not about applause, but about accepting responsibility and acting with integrity, even when the world is uncertain. The fire had also taught the town lessons about community, preparedness, and compassion. Neighbors who had once been distant began to work together more often, sharing resources, helping with repairs, and looking out for one another. The sense of unity that had always existed in Willow Creek was renewed, strengthened by the realization that courage and cooperation were not opposites, but companions in building a strong and resilient community. As weeks turned into months, the barn became more than a building again. It was a symbol of recovery, of the way a community could rise from fear and tragedy, and of the quiet heroism that shaped their lives. The animals thrived once more, guided by the steady hands of the rancher who had risked everything to save them. And the townspeople, having witnessed both his bravery and humility, began to understand the depth of character it takes to act selflessly, even when others may not fully comprehend the reasons behind it. Mr. Thompson himself found peace in the rhythm of everyday life. The memories of the fire remained, as did the echoes of the past losses that had shaped him, but he had learned that courage and love could coexist with grief. Caring for his land and animals, helping neighbors, and living with quiet integrity had become the foundation of his days. He understood that while life was unpredictable, the way one responded to it defined who they were, and that each act of kindness and responsibility left an invisible mark that would endure long after the immediate events had passed. The town, too, grew wiser. They no longer saw heroism as something distant or dramatic, reserved only for moments of extreme danger. They began to recognize it in daily acts of care, in patience, in compassion, and in the quiet resolve to face challenges with integrity. Mr. Thompson's actions during the fire became a story not only of bravery, but of life's complex balance between risk, responsibility, and love. As the sun set over Willow Creek, painting the sky with orange and pink hues, Mr. Thompson walked among his fields, the animals following him with calm familiarity. The fire had tested him, the town had questioned him, and life had reminded him that courage is rarely simple. Yet in that quiet evening, there was satisfaction, clarity, and a sense of purpose. He had faced the fire, not for fame, not for recognition, but because it was right, and in doing so, he had shown everyone what it truly meant to act with heart. The celebration of life, recovery, and courage continued in the small ways that mattered most. Children learned from the rancher's example, neighbors shared stories and lessons, and the community moved forward with a renewed sense of togetherness. Mr. Thompson's story became a part of Willow Creek's history, a reminder that even the quietest people can shine in moments of trial, and that true strength comes not from seeking admiration, but from acting with care, humility, and courage. In the years that followed, the barn remained a symbol of resilience. The fire, once a terrifying event, became a story to teach new generations about bravery, responsibility, and the value of community. And at the heart of it all, Mr. Thompson continued his life as always, quiet, steady, and full of care. He had faced danger, endured judgment, and healed old wounds, all while showing that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. Willow Creek, shaped by both tragedy and heroism, moved forward with hope. The town learned that bravery is not just in dramatic moments, but in the steady choices made every day. They learned that heroism often carries quiet scars, and that love, compassion, and responsibility are the forces that bind a community together. And Mr. Thompson, the quiet rancher who had risked everything, became a living example of all these lessons, proving that true courage endures long after the flames have faded. In the end, the fire did not break Willow Creek, it strengthened it. And the rancher, though forever carrying the memories of loss and fear, became a beacon of hope, resilience, and the kind of quiet heroism that changes lives in ways both seen and unseen. The town would remember that day, and every day after, not just for the danger and the fire, but for the heart, courage, and care that had saved them all.